of the Carson City Consolidated Municipality Notice Meeting Charter Review Committee. It's May 13, 2024, and it's 2 o'clock. We're in the Community Center in the Robert Bob Kroll Boardroom. I'll call the meeting to order. Could we take the roll, please?
Chair Staub.
Present.
Vice Chair Hoffman. Present. Member Fagan. Member Hanneman. Member Hart. Here. Member Wilkie McCulloch. Member Robinson. Here. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Mr. Hart, could you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. For public comment, any member of the public is invited to comment on matters that are not specifically included in our agenda. No action will be taken on whatever matters you're discussing. And if we would appreciate it if you would limit your comments to 3 minutes, if possible. If any member of the public would like to come forward and comment, would you please state your name for the record?
Thank you, Chair. Denny French, Carson City, Nevada. And I just actually came for one item, and I won't mention it now, but I think Supervisor Schutte covered it real well, so you won't have to hear from me about that. And it's great to see you all, and I'll be looking forward to listening to the rest and seeing if I have 2 cents to throw in. Otherwise, I'll try to keep quiet. Thank you very much. Have a good time.
Thank you and welcome. We'll go on to item 4A, which is approval of minutes. Everybody has a copy of the minutes. If there are any corrections, please state them. If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
I make a motion to approve the minutes of March 19th, 2024.
I'll second. Have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, the matters before us. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, the matter carries. Thank you. We'll go to item 5A. This is discussion of possible action regarding recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to amend Section 2.180 of the Carson City Charter to revise, clarify, and update language establishing Board of Supervisors' scope of authority over animals and poultry. Mr. Woodbury.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll just kind of walk through with the committee the supporting documentation that we provided on this item. Pages 15 through, excuse me, 16 in your packet trace the language of this particular charter provision from its adoption in 1969 through the current version. So you can see that over the years it has been amended somewhat, but the some of the terminology that is used is still from that 1969 original version, and that was the purpose of, as you'll recall, this proposal arises from the public input that was received in regard to changes that the committee, that the public would like to have the committee take a look at. The requester in this instance is Supervisor Lisa Schutte, who is here today, and I think would like to address the committee at the appropriate time. But the objective, and I will add that I met with Supervisor Schutte as this proposal amendment was prepared, so I do think that it does reflect her purpose and her intent behind that input. And it's pretty simple, really. It updates the language to remove the reference to poultry. For reasons I'm not quite clear on, the original version distinguished between animals and poultry. In looking into the matter, this is what lawyers do. I looked into whether there was a meaningful distinction for that, a need to have that distinguished, and I couldn't find one. And there are many other charter provisions that have amended away the poultry portion of it because poultry is captured within animals, the term animals. So that simplifies that to some extent. The other substantive thing that this amendment does is it corrects the term per capita tax on dogs. If a fee were imposed, it's incorrect, legally speaking, to refer to that as a quote-unquote tax. A tax is different than a fee, and the assessment that would be imposed in this case is more appropriately characterized as a fee and called a fee. I stole from other jurisdictions, other charters and other jurisdictions who have expanded the power of the board to impose not just a fee, an annual license fee on dogs, but to expand to include a license fee on any kind of animal. And this is all discretionary, I should say. This is empowering. It's not mandatory. It doesn't say the board has to do that. It just empowers the board to do that if they choose. And by board, of course, I mean the Board of Supervisors. The next section there, Section 2, eliminates the reference to a pound, eliminates a reference to a pound keeper. Those are terms from the original version of this provision, and a lot of other jurisdictions, I shouldn't say a lot of other, but several other jurisdictions have amended that to refer to the pound as an animal shelter and refer to the pound keeper as something different. So in Carson City, under the municipal code, the position of quote-unquote pound keeper is now called an animal services manager. So that's the reason for those two. There's language eliminating what happens to an animal which is found at large. That language is eliminated because, at least from the requester's point of view, it's not consistent with certainly the current practices and not really necessarily the recent historical practices of animal services in Carson City. So that was just eliminated in its entirety. I will say that the board retains authority to impose those kinds of regulations. It just does it under a provision in Nevada revised statutes that empowers a county to, I'm paraphrasing, I'm not quoting it exactly, but it empowers a board of county commissioners or board of supervisors in this case to enact regulations on what's to be done with animals that are found at large. So they still do have that power. And then the third section of that is unchanged, empowers the board to prohibit cruelty to animals, and that is not changed at all. There is an explanation provided that offers some explanation of what we're trying to accomplish with this proposed amendment. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. And as I indicate, Supervisor Schutte, the original requester, is here in attendance as well.
Thanks, Mr. Woodbury. Are there any comments for Mr. Woodbury on his presentation or the changes he's recommending on page 17? Welcome, Stacy. No comments? Well, the only comment I have is, do you want to put in here how many dogs somebody's allowed to have?
That's in another section.
Okay.
But it is in there.
Okay.
Not in the charter, it's in the ordinances, but it's, yeah, very, very much spelled out.
So if I had a dog at this point, I can't tell him or threaten him that I'm going to take him to the pound? Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Are there any questions? No questions? Thanks, Mr. Woodbury. Is there any member of the public that would like to come forward and speak on the recommended changes identified on page 17 of our packet. Welcome Supervisor Schutte.
Thank you, Lisa Schutte, for the record. I just appreciate this opportunity. It's an opportunity to clarify the language and to have it really represent what shelters are doing now versus what they used to do. And so Mr. Woodbury has been wonderful to work with in terms of really just stating, you know, what the city or what we're empowered to do, and really in terms of enacting regulations, it's about meeting the why. You know, animal shelters provide a service. They provide a safety service for community members. You know, animals running at large. That is a concern for traffic, of course. It's certainly a concern for the animal. In terms of the role of animal control officers, no longer is it about capture and putting into jail. That is certainly an option, but it is more cost-effective and beneficial that animal control officers actually look to find the home of the critter running at large. That's a win-win for everybody. And so I just, again, appreciate this opportunity to clean up the language and to move forward in a way that better represents what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Schutte. Any questions from the committee for Supervisor Schutte?
And I think, yeah, so to fix, impose, and collect an annual per capita tax on all dogs and provide for the capture and disposal of all dogs which the tax is not paid, that needs to go. And instead say, and fix, impose, and collect an annual license fee on animals. And what that does is it allows also animals to get home faster and more efficiently.
Thank you. Again, questions? No? You know, I thought maybe they put poultry in there specifically because someone might interpret animals don't include chickens.
I thought that as well. And maybe in 1969, you know, that was a special category of animals. I don't know, but there are other charter provisions have it to this day still as animals and poultry.
Well, there's always a lot of questions historically, people having poultry or chickens in their backyard because they want fresh eggs. And their argument was, well, we're actually talking about like horses and cows and sheep and stuff, goats, not poultry, you know, so it was specifically identified, but that's fine. If there are no questions, the matter is before us. I would entertain a motion, which is on page 12.
Mr. Chair, could you just confirm there's no more public
Oh, I'm
comment?
sorry.
I didn't know if Mr. French wanted
I'm
to.
sorry. Is there any other members of the public would like to come forward and comment? Please identify yourself for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Denny French, Carson City, Nevada. I'd like to have it read as it would be that you're voting, just to make sure I got it right. Is it possible you could read the suggested wording?
It is,
It was on 17.
we can identify the changes in the motion. Would that be
But you-
fine?
But the basic motion, it's like three paragraphs in it? Well, not for the whole, yeah,
Oh, I know. Want me to do it?
more like 3 pages. Okay, I'm
We'll let
sorry.
Ms. Hoffman take a shot at it.
Well, just the short version that Supervisor Schutte had read was sufficient for me to feel comfortable with your votes. Is that possible to allow
Okay, here we
her?
go. Mr. Chairman, I move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors an amendment to subsection 2.180 of the Carson City Charter reading, fix, impose, and collect an annual per capita tax on all dogs and provide for the capture and disposal of all dogs on, oh no,
Yeah,
that's not right.
yeah, that's
That's the
right.
current version. I apologize. Oh, where is it?
It's on page 17.
Oh, sorry. Whoa, okay. Here we go. Okay, start over. I move to amend the charter to read, "The board may fix, impose, and collect an annual license fee on animals, regulate or prohibit the running at large within Carson City of all kinds of animals, establish an animal shelter, appoint an animal services manager, and prescribe his or her duties, and prohibit cruelty to animals."
Thank you so much.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
You have a second here, Hanneman.
I have a motion and I have a second. Is there discussion on the motion? Hearing none, the matter is before us. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the matter carries unanimously.
And it's about time, Lisa.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going on to page 19 of your board book. And this is discussion of possible action regarding a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to amend Section 5.100, subsection 2, to change the time the election returns are sealed and kept by the clerk from 6 months to 22 months. Mr. Woodbury?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I unfortunately have a confession to make that I provided the committee with some incorrect information at its initial meeting. There is a statutory provision, NRS 293.391, that provides that certain election materials must be maintained by, in this case, the Carson City clerk, recorder, for a minimum of 22 months. That appeared to be inconsistent with Section 5.100 of the Carson City Charter, which said that election returns only need to be kept for 6 months. The discrepancy is resolved because returns, quote-unquote returns, are something different than the material listed in the statute. So the statute talks about things, includes the voted ballots, the rejected ballots, the spoiled ballots, the challenge lists, the records printed on paper of voted ballots collected pursuant to NRS 293B.400, that's not a return. Reports prepared pursuant to NRS 293.269937, those aren't returns, and stubs of the ballots used. It lists a few more things, but the point is that statute does not specifically say you have to keep the quote-unquote returns for 22 months. I discovered this, my error, reviewing the charters of several other jurisdictions, which are substantively identical to Carson City in that they only require the returns to be kept for 6 months, including charter provisions that were adopted as recently as 2019. So the state of the law in Carson City and that of, I believe, every other jurisdiction is that you have to keep the returns for 6 months and that you have to keep this other specific material for 22 months. It's my understanding, and Mr. Hohen he's the expert on this, so he'll correct me if anything I'm saying here is wrong. Mr. Hohen's practice is to actually keep the returns along with the other material for the 22 months. And there's nothing prohibiting him from doing that. That's actually probably a good practice. But to the extent I said that the charter was not consistent with Nevada law, that's incorrect. It actually is, because the charter's talking about a different thing. And all the returns are is really the report, kind of the summary report of that Mr. Hohen will take all this material and compile the returns, the report of here's what happened in the election. And I believe it's broken down by precinct and by, of course, race. But that is what's presented to the Board of Supervisors for a canvass. Once they canvass that, the election is approved, and Mr. Hohen then moves on. There's certainly nothing wrong with codifying the current practice in the charter and saying, okay, we're going to keep all this stuff pursuant to the statute. We're also going to go ahead and keep the returns like we're doing now for that same period of time. But I wanted to clarify that it's not necessary to resolve a legal discrepancy. That practice could be changed if Mr. Hohen wanted to, and still be compliant with Nevada statute. But this has been drafted in case the committee wants to proceed with that. Like I say, there's nothing legally prohibiting that. And all the amendment does is in paragraph 2, changes from 6 to at least 22 months. And that's in accordance with the term in the statute.
Thank you, Mr. Woodbury. Does Mr. Hone like to comment on this?
Nope, he's got it right.
So do we need to potentially provide a definition of return or what other documents we might be talking about?
Good luck finding one. It was so hard to find what an election return is. And really, the only thing that I could go back to was the title of the report that the clerk recorder submits to the board is called a return. So, but it's not in state law. It's not in anything. But I don't think it's necessary to do that if the amendment's going to be made. And if the amendment's not going to be made, I would just go back to, we have to keep the stuff that's identified in statute, and anything else, including a quote-unquote return, is something that we don't have to keep that long.
So when we do keep the election material for 22 months, we do seal that material. So it's not like you can go back and look at that 6 months later or 12 months later. It's all under seal until that 22-month period of time. We just recently destroyed the June 2022 primary on April 15th, 22 months later after that election. So it's just sealed. It's there for safekeeping in case a court order would come our way to open that and look at that.
Okay, thank you. Well, my concern would be, I mean, I'm a guy of consistency and repetition. So my fear is the interpretation of the term election return. And I would hate to have someone come forward at some later date and somehow convince a board of supervisors or a judge or a jury that what was disposed of after 6 months actually was part of, quote, an election return. And by law, we should have kept it 22 months. So as chairman, I would rather just make it consistent so we're not disposing of records that someone might convince a judge to define that whatever we disposed of was part of a return, an election return. Any other discussion? Vice Chair Hoffman?
About that. Also, if we're calling the report that comes to the Board of Supervisors the return, and if there were ever a question and somebody wanted to argue it, that report isn't helpful if all the material is gone, because the report is just numbers on a sheet of paper. So if the reason we're keeping that is in case it's questioned in the future, then I think we need to keep all the detritus, for lack of a better word, that created that report with the report. So let's keep it all for 22 months is what I think.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hoffman. Any other comments from the members?
Wilkie, so it's not going to be any more a financial hit because we're already doing that. So we wouldn't have to get additional storage, correct? So.
Thank you. Other comments? Any member of the public have any comment on this action item regarding keeping election returns 22 months? Seeing none, the matters before us, I'd entertain a motion.
I'm sorry, I have a question.
Go ahead.
What in the books right now is 6 months? The return or the materials? I'm confused about.
The returns under section 5.100 can be destroyed after 6 months.
Okay. And we're defining return as the sheet that comes to the Board of Supervisors, right?
The clerk's,
Can we come up with a term that just covers all of that and say, let's keep all of the evidence of the election results for 22 months?
It's, when you say that, we keep everything. We keep undeliverable ballots, we keep torn ballots, we keep ballots that have been surrendered at the polling location. We keep every bit of the documentation possible, tracking logs, signatures, everything.
So that's what I think would be good, clear language in there, that the clerk recorder keep all of the documentation of the results of the election for 22 months following the election.
I think we could run into some trouble there.
Too broad?
Yeah, just because when we use the term anything, and I'm paraphrasing you poorly, but anything having to do with the election, any material by which you would review the legitimacy of the election. I think we're going to run into an issue with the legislature on that. So we could certainly look at referencing this particular statute and say something like, in addition to the material required to be preserved by this statute, the clerk shall keep the returns for this period of time. But it doesn't currently do that. This charter provision only concerns returns. So we're not broadening the scope of this particular section in its current language. And just legally, that's a little cleaner for us to not broaden the scope. We're just broadening the term of it or the time period for it. But you're the committee and whatever you'd like to do.
But you're the legal person, so if you throw some language this way, because I think we're in agreement that we want to keep it all for 22 months, but I'm not quite sure how to phrase that. Anybody?
But does it have to be in the statute? Don't you have like a policy or procedure that lists exactly what those records are?
Oh.
So you could go back and look at that in order. I don't think it has to actually be in the charter, because those documents could change depending on statute, clerk recorder, procedures. So I think if somebody wanted to know what those documents are, they could go back and look at the clerk's procedures or policies.
The only thing you potentially would change with this is how long the returns are kept. The returns are based on all this stuff that the statute says you're going to keep. And that this would not change that.
So you're saying basically what's here is here, it's already done? Okay. So I would make a motion that we keep the language as is. I don't know.
Anybody have any comments on that recommendation?
I would suggest that Richard's right. The timeframes need to be the same. They need to be consistent, because this is only the returns we're talking about here is only what he's reporting to the Board of Supervisors. The material that makes up that report is controlled by state law. And so it's 22 months, it's there, all of those documents are covered, and the only piece we're talking about here is the report he generates. And I think it should be saved for 22 months as well.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Any other comments? Well, I've already made my comments. I think it should be consistent on agreement with Member Hart about this change. And so unless there's any comments from the committee, any member of the public like to make any comments on this amendment again? Thank you. Matters before us. I would entertain a motion, and let me help you with the motion. I believe the language would be, I'm not making the motion, I move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors an amendment to Section 5.100, subsection 2, to change the time of the election returns are sealed and kept by the clerk from 6 months to 22 months. Does anybody wish to make that motion?
I will make that motion as you have read it, Hanneman.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second by Wilkie.
Thank you. Any discussion on the motion, on the motion? Hearing none, the matter is before us. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Matter carries unanimously. So let's move to page 22, item 5C. And this is discussion possible action regarding a recommendation of the Board of Supervisors to amend the Carson City Charter to require periodic studies of the city's organizational structure and its operation. Ms. Hicks?
Thank you, Chairman. During the last meeting, the committee requested staff to research previous instances in which the state of Nevada conducted review or evaluation of any part of their government structure to inform the committee on consideration of whether something along those lines should also be added to our charter. We did work with the Legislative Council Bureau of the Nevada Legislature and provided you a memorandum that summarized those activities in the Nevada State Legislature. However, also reviewing the charter and having discussions internally, we wanted to advise that Charter Section 3.075, we believe, contains similar provisions to the state. That section is in regards to an internal auditor that the city needs to hire, and we do that through a consultant with Eide Bailey. I did provide you a copy of that section of the charter. And essentially what we do on an annual basis is, first of all, we have an audit committee. Those members are appointed by the Board of Supervisors. Annually, our internal auditor does a risk assessment with senior management in the city. That includes all of our department directors. The mayor's usually involved with that as well. And we determine if there are any areas that we wish to have the internal auditor investigate within the city. Through that risk assessment, a work program is completed that goes through the audit committee for recommendation then to the Board of Supervisors. And annually, there's usually about 5 or 6 different audits that take place. Some recently we did look into and review the information technology procedures in the clerk recorder's office. We've reviewed our business licensing in the past. So we felt that that captures perhaps the intent of what this request was. However, we're certainly open to any discussion and direction from the committee to bring forward to the Board of Supervisors. I know Chairman Staub also provided some additional information as late material, and so we can discuss that before we move forward.
Thank you, Ms. Hicks. Any comments from the board on, and I will note, I did provide Ms. Hicks and Mr. Woodbury copies of them documents that I did some little bit of research about government efficiency and effectiveness. And I thought the committee members should take a look at this because frankly, I believed, at least my comments in our last meeting, go pretty much to what these documents state and not so much to the internal auditor. But I'll let the committee discuss the issue before I comment further on it. Mr. Robinson?
Yeah, I think the term internal is what I have some question about. And I'm not questioning what they do, but I think what may be needed in my experience and other looks at government and how it's run is that it's more than internal. And talking to some people that are retired Carson City employees, some of them at a fairly high level, there's a need from the outside to look at how Carson City runs. Not completely outside, we need some people, or I would suggest we need some people from inside, but also the business community, the folks that have to live under the regulation of Carson City government, how that's working, how responsive they are. And I think a look like that, and again, talking to some people who've been in Carson City government is overdue.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Any other comments from the board? The committee, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I'm Hanneman. I'm trying to understand that. So ID, or however you say it, the Bailey, the regional certified CPA is not considered outside. That's considered an internal auditor.
Technically, we hired them as our internal auditor. They are an independent third party, but yes, because we hired them, they are considered our internal auditor.
Okay, so what would the external auditor be to your question?
Well, I don't think we're talking, my experience is not an auditor, and that connotes to me financial and money. Doesn't have to, but that's the normal, that's the way the legislature does it. They have auditors review state agencies about how they spent money. And that indeed may be part of it, but I guess what I thought Rich was talking about and what I'm trying to convey is how government is run, how the personnel is used. What is the feedback from people, as I said, regulated by Carson City, businesses and private folks? How's that working? And again, talkative to retired people and a couple current employees, that comes out of a study that is composed of not just internal and not just looking at the financial part of it, but the organizational part of it. And the outcome may be, for instance, that we need more people in certain areas. The outcome could be we need less people. But as a recovering bureaucrat myself, I can tell you that sometimes from inside, especially if you're there for a long time, you don't look at those kinds of things. And it's refreshing to have somebody from the outside take a look and make some suggestions.
So when you brought this up, Commissioner Stopp, was it looking at making more streamlined government is what you're looking for? Because he is kind of right with the internal audit. We're just making sure that we paid the bills on time, followed the procedures we were supposed to follow, and that nothing fell through the cracks. At least that's how it was with the school district. If we got written up, it was because we didn't do something right. It didn't tell us if we were trying to streamline government or use resources in a better way.
Well, my position is to look at Carson City government periodically, whether that be internal or external or a combination of both, to see whether there are any opportunities to reduce fragmentation, overlap, duplication in an effort to achieve maximum efficiency with the least amount of financial burden or misspending. And so I provide you, the committee, with documents that go to the essence of what I'm trying to get to. And I'll just tell you one, as long as Ms. Hicks doesn't have a problem with me reading this into the record. But this is an enrolled copy of an act that was enacted by the people of the state of Illinois. And it states in here that and what they recommended is the formation of a committee made up of people inside government and city government, outside of city government. And this is for local governments, not for state governments. And the committee was to do an investigation, comprehensive investigation of the local government, and then report back to the governing board potential efficiencies or changes to address overlap and inefficient services and duties that various commissions and boards may have. And it says the duty of the the duties of the committee include but are not limited to the study of the government units governing statutes, ordinances, rules, procedures, powers, jurisdiction, shared services, intergovernmental agreements, and interrelationships with other government units in the state. The committee shall collect data, research, and an analysis as necessary, and then make recommendations back to the governing board. So, and having been on the Board of Supervisors at a time when we had an internal auditor at that time, and this is all based on recollection, that had never written an audit and had never provided an audit report on any agency of Carson City. So a few of us on the board took it upon ourselves to form the audit committee and to look at the internal auditor's duties and functions and see whether we could get an audit. And so it was determined, and I was chairman of the first audit committee, and we did determine a process and procedure where an audit plan, an annual audit plan was developed with our internal auditor. And that would be presented to the audit committee, and the audit committee then would dispatch the internal auditor to do that which the committee enacted. Through various processes, potential conflicts, political attitudes, that was somehow, it evolved into the elimination of the internal auditor. And the board at that time, I was not on the board at that time, and the committee came to the conclusion that we can outsource this process. And so now that's what's happened. The city no longer has an internal auditor. It outsources all of the internal auditor functions to a third party CPA in most cases. And then that CPA works with the audit committee to develop the audit plan and then carry out the audit plan. But in my opinion, the internal audit function is focused on accounting processes. I'm talking about, do we need 20 boards and commissions to assist our Board of Supervisor in making decisions? Does one function that's in one city department being duplicated by another city? Like, is code enforcement being handled by the building department, or is it being handled by community services? And should it be, or shouldn't it be? Health inspections, how should that, who really controls health inspections? And these all have costs and they all have fees. And I think every 5 or 10 years, I think it behooves the Board of Supervisors to take a look back at itself, at its government, at its processes and functions, at its boards and commissions and committees, and decide, are we doing it in the most cost-effective and efficient manner, providing the optimum services to our constituency, our citizens, at the best bang for the buck? Because as far as I'm concerned, from my 8 years on the board of supervisors and having lived in this town since virtually all my life, everybody, and having worked with Steve in state government, every government entity, I think, should take a look at itself very comprehensively, using the resources within city government and outside city government to make recommendations to the Board of Supervisors that, yes, we're doing it right, and we're doing it for the best bang for our buck. In my opinion, we're not doing that.
Do you think any of this is being done during the budget process, though? Because you already have your department heads that come up with budgets and their people, personnel, resources?
Well, I think certainly that should happen as part of the budgeting process. But I think what I'm looking for, and maybe Mr. Robbins can comment on it, having been involved in that very intimately at the state level, that I think it's just something that we'd have to do, and the budget process isn't gonna get you there either.
I'd agree, Rich. I think that maybe the way you described it might be too big of a bite all at once. And maybe there could be a regularized process. And I'm thinking now of looking at, if there was a committee or the board looks at all of Carson City government, that's a big bite. And so maybe a schedule could be set up that would make it a little less cumbersome on city government too, because I know, and maybe this is some of the trepidations from the city folks, these kinds of things take some time from the government workers, and sometimes they get exasperated about that because they say, hey, look, I've got my job to do. I can't be
Sure.
responding to you all the time. So I think I agree with what it ought to be, and it ought not be totally financial. But maybe there's a way to set up a process to do it segmentally across state government.
Well, I
or
agree with you.
city
It could be a very burdensome process. There are ways to make it, I think, less burdensome, but it's a process doesn't take place annually. I mean, the statute in Illinois required local governments to look at it every 10 years. And so that's a long time
Is this,
between look-sees.
is this a best practices kind of an audit
Absolutely.
as opposed to a financial audit?
Absolutely. This is not a financial, this is a practices and procedure evaluation. Like, for example, I don't want to pick out any particular committee, but do we need a historical commission and a cultural commission? Or could the historical commission be the historical and cultural commission? We eliminate one commission that reports to the Board of Supervisors. In other words, it's an evaluation of how we operate as a government.
All right.
Chairman, if I may, I do believe that our current audit program does encompass best practices and procedures. It's just a matter of whether those are identified through the risk assessment. If you look at the charter under subsection C, while A and B most certainly are discussing accounting procedures, the C says conduct any special investigation at the Board of Supervisors into any financial matter. Anything that we're doing as far as best practices and procedures affects the finances of the city and what we're doing. So maybe there's a way to clarify some of that, but I do think the intent and the operation currently of the audit, the risk assessment, and the work program is set up to capture those things. They just maybe, those specifically haven't been on our list yet.
Thank you. Any members of the committee have any other comments? Vice Chair Hoffman?
I have a comment, because in your examples, you've a couple of times mentioned all these commissions, like the one we sit on today. And I hesitate to thin those out because I find that this is the way that your average Joe can participate in government. You know, I mean, somebody who's really into history, someone who's really into culture, that's a place for them. And it doesn't cost anything. We're not paid. It's a volunteer opportunity. And I feel like the more that citizens can feel like they are a part of what happens, the more they will buy into what is happening in the community. So I wouldn't willy-nilly chop those away because they're overlapping unless we're not finding people to work on them. And I don't know, maybe it's burdensome to the board to hear from so many committees, but I don't know. I feel like letting citizens be involved, that's a thing we don't want to mess with too much.
Thank you.
And I agree with you, having sat on a number of the commissions. Some of them don't really have a whole lot to do. So I think that goes back to your comment about why are they even existing. I do know, like the tree commission or whatever they called it, you know, they had nothing to discuss, so they disbanded on their own. And yes, you could probably put some together, but it does take staff time, attorney time, all kinds of other time to staff these other than, so I, you know, understand both of um, your concerns. I was on the redevelopment commission for a while, and we had something to do at that time with the facade program. But for the most part, it was just listening to what Public Works wanted, basically. And there was not a whole lot of direction that came out of the committee or could come out of the committee. So they rarely meet anymore. So is that a committee that needs to go somewhere else, be part of somewhere else, or continue? I don't know the answer.
Thank you, Member Hannum. Well, like I said, I was on the board in 2000, early 2000, and it's now 2024, and I've yet to see what I'd like to see. And that's why I thought, well, I'd bring it forward and we'd chat about it. I suppose we don't have to really do anything. I mean, we have a member of the Board of Supervisors here, and thank you for coming. But I really think if we sit back in 24 years, has the internal auditor and the audit committee done anything like this? And we simply haven't. And I really think that it behooves this committee to potentially make a recommendation to the board to at least address whether Carson City as a government wants to conduct a comprehensive study of its efficiency and effectiveness on a periodic basis, like once every 10 or 5 or 10 years.
And that recommendation wouldn't include targeting any agency or commission. I mean, we got off onto that, and I agree, but that wouldn't be part of our recommendation.
No. That was just an example I just pulled out of the air. But I mean, like I said, I've lived here all my life. I don't know that we have ever done it. But I remember back when you were, in the governor's office and Kenny Gwynn's days. I mean, agency had to come forward and prove why they exist and what they do, and whether that's we do it on a law enforcement basis or public works basis, or I mean, I think it should be comprehensive. I think administrators should be able to come forward. Elected officials should be able to and appear in front of the committee and say, I've sat down with my people and we've looked at what we do. We look how we do it. We think we could do it better this way. And I don't know that we're doing that. If we're just getting up in the morning and going to work and just doing what we do, I've always been one for taking a look in the mirror and say, am I doing okay? Or does my wife tell me, well, you need to change, man? Okay, so that's what I'd like to see Carson City do. Just take a look at itself periodically and say, hey, do we need to make some adjustments? So
I have one more comment. This is reminding me of during my years in education decades ago when we started the whole process of strategic planning. And I know that that's not what this is necessarily, but that's what it felt like, because we had to validate everything that we did. And it was a lot of work, but it was a lot of soul searching. And I agree with you. I think it's important. I just think that if this moves forward, we need to be prepared that employees are going to be burdened by the extra time they have to get in there and do this work and then bring it to the board. And at some point, it all has to come together if you want to look for overlaps. And I don't know, just the idea of structuring it is kind of making my head want to explode right now. But I do think it is valid and could be useful. So.
Thank you. And I think, you can't forget who we are. We're public servants. The only thing that city government does is provide services to the people that live in their community. And I think taking a look at what we do and how we do it wouldn't hurt. and shouldn't hurt. And once every 10 years can't be that much of a burden. So. Well,
Yeah, that's the other thing. In 10 years, everything, a lot changes. I mean, we started out with the strategic plan in the schools and got raised to the top. We were one of the few in the nation that got that grant, but that was because of the work of the employees and the community getting together to do that. But a lot changes. I mean, we were one of the few school districts that had a mobile program already in place when COVID hit. And nobody saw that coming, or everybody, all the districts had to be mobile. So that's something to keep in. I think it's a great idea. I think maybe a little bit more fine tuning, because we have to remember that the charter is our constitution. It's not, it's our constitution. The legislature is not making, in the most part, making changes to the constitution. They're making changes to the revised statutes. So we gotta kind of remember that we gotta fly at a 30,000 mile view too. But I think looking at stuff like that is very important, especially like us who have lived here a lot and long time and seen all the changes and want our grandchildren to move here and live here too. So I think it has some great parables, but I think we need to look and kind of focus it down a little bit before we send it along. But I think if we worked on it, we could do something by next year when we meet again.
well, we meet every other year, and I might not be here. You may not be here. None of us, we all be new people. We only make recommendations to the board, and I don't see any problem with making this recommendation to the board, and the board can decide how they want to handle it, what resources they want to throw at it, and they can refine the process. That's what they do. But if we're going to do our job, I think that this recommendation would at least provide a direction for the board to address it, because it's not getting addressed.
I think this is what Stacy was saying. Doesn't our recommendation have to be a recommendation to change the charter?
There's a proposed motion here for
Okay.
the periodic review, require periodic studies of the city's organization, structure, and its operation. And that's a recommendation. And we have to change, because there's no I recommend and then not recommend. So we have to add that in there. So are we done up here? Are we? Okay. Is there any member of the public would like to comment on this item 5C regarding governmental efficiency and effectiveness and a process to get there? Hello again. Please state your name for the record.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Denny French, thank you. Okay, this was getting in way over my head till the explanations and considerations that you've all put forward. And what I'm thinking is, because I think we need to review ourselves daily as individuals and as a city, a part of a state and a part of a country, we really do need to start looking at ways. I went to the legislative water discussion, and I wasn't alone. I'm sorry. Excuse me. Having a little difficulty today. Communication issue. But the main thing is, I want as many reviews as you all have the boots to step into. And if we do it with consideration, conscientious thought, and appreciation, not just to my particular wants or needs, outside of it, we have huge things coming up. The water report was not good. And unless we all work together on that, we're going to have a hell of a problem. And I think considerations on saving people and time and such is important, but I certainly appreciate Vice Chair Hoffman's statement that the more you can get the community involved, the better. And some of the commissions may not have huge duties, but when you show up and you put something out there, it might just be the seed that promotes a whole nother way of looking at it. So thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Supervisor Schutte?
Thank you. And since this will be coming before the board. I don't know if it's even appropriate for me to comment, but as Lisa's Shooty citizen, I really love the dialogue, and I think it's incredibly important, and I love the analogy to education. It made me think about, as a teacher, when we were tasked with put the objective on the board, and by the end of the lesson, student will, and this is how it's going to be done, and it really helped everybody focus. And so in the discussion, in the why does the department exist and what do they do, that made me think about perhaps in terms of the different departments in Carson City, approach it as this is what we do and this is why. I think it's really important that the why be clear, because then we gain that understanding of the process. I think about the different issues that come before the board in terms of how do we pay for something, or what is the job that needs to be done, and what are the means of getting it done. Something like this really could help clarify. So that's, I think this conversation is very helpful. I'm not, yeah.
And it is a public-private process, and it's not merely all government agencies. It's the public, obviously, and the information I provided to you and the specific statute that they use in Illinois creates a committee of public and private participation in the process, which I think is absolutely important. So, any other comments?
I have a question comment. So this proposed motion, even though it says to not recommend, if we were to rephrase that to recommend, it doesn't have a spot in the charter yet for it. Is that a problem? Can we just say we want it somewhere in there, or?
Well, no, I mean, I guess there's a short answer and a long answer. The short answer is, even though there's not a spot in the charter, we can make a spot. You can add, a section into it. I do. You can put the recommendations in any kind of format that you would like. Just for full disclosure, I do want the committee to know that from my perspective, from the legal perspective, I believe the structure for what you're talking about already exists in terms of, and it's, I do acknowledge and frankly agree with it being somewhat problematic that we're talking that these things are entitled audit, right? Like the internal auditor or the audit committee, because that connotes a financial, to the exclusion of anything else. This is just a look at financial. But as Deputy City Manager Hicks pointed out, the charter allows that to be pretty broad and to be defined by the Board of Supervisors to say, look, the internal auditor, here's what we want you to look at. And that can include processes, that can include commissions, that can include agencies. It can include all that. Now, that would be done by the internal auditor, and the internal auditor would report to an audit committee. But those functions can be done. They can be done with the structure for that exists in the charter. At least that's going to be the opinion that I'll be offering to the Board of Supervisors. Now, it'll be up to them if they want more specificity, if they want, hey, we want this to happen every 5 years, or we want the audit committee to consist of, more people or other people than what it exists. That it wouldn't be inappropriate to amend the charter to specifically say that, but as Ms. Wilkie pointed out, this is our Constitution. And one thing I learned from the last time we went to the legislature is when you open that door to the charter, they look at things that you might not necessarily want them to look at.
That's
or
right.
They care about things that you don't want changed, that work. That now they ended up going the way we wanted them to go, but there was at least one member of the legislature that was on a completely different page. And at any rate, you lose control of that a little bit when you go to the legislature, as opposed to doing these things through an ordinance, which the Board of Supervisors retains total control of. The other thing I would say is, you know, if we mess it up, it can only be amended every 2 years at best, you know, and if we go and we do something and we want to tweak it, we only get one bill draft request as things exist right now. And maybe there's a higher priority bill draft request, and we don't have a friend in the legislature to help us with one of those. So it can be in place for years. I say that to say that it may be better to experiment, for lack of a better term, through ordinance that can be changed pretty quickly. But with all, I just say that so when you hear me say something like that with the board, it doesn't come as a surprise. But it is perfectly appropriate for you to raise the issue, for you to raise it in the context of an amendment or a conceptual idea for what might be included in the charter. And if it goes a different direction, if it goes, well, we like the concept, but we don't want to, you know, put it through as a charter amendment, we're just going to go back to, you know, what we used to do with the internal auditor and the audit committee or some such thing, however it goes. But so that, I gave you a super long answer to a simple question.
Well, clearly, Mr. Woodbury, I think we can work with it from the ordinance level, and we can potentially tweak the internal audit section so that it can be expanded to go beyond, quote, the idea that I'm only the internal auditor, and call it one jurisdiction called it GEAR, the Government Efficiency and Accountability Review Board, and the acronym was GEAR, the GEAR Board. So, but I think it's time to at least take a step forward and make a recommendation to the board, and the board can decide what it wants to do. Any other comments? Any comments from the public based upon what we've talked about?
Thank you, Chair Denny French. Your bringing up the gear part does open me to the consideration of maybe not taking it to the legislature. They're pretty interesting. Don't know how else to say that, but they're a lot. So we might not want to step in and ask them for their opinions right now. But the main thing is, thank you for bringing that up. I hadn't given that a look at. Thank you.
Thank you.
So when we make our recommendations and that all goes to the supervisors, is there a way that we could just say, we want this change about the dog pound, and we want this change about keeping the records, and then we had a conversation about this? Can we just bring it to them to put it into the atmosphere and as a thought? I mean, because I like the idea of let's continue this discussion and maybe somebody move forward, but I absolutely concur with the idea of not taking it to the legislature and using, you know, opening up our charter to that. So is there some way we can send this to them?
And
You can make a motion.
could we make a motion that we have the internal auditors include best business practices in their audit?
Well, I would probably address it as to make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors, to consider a amendment to the ordinance which would allow periodic studies of city government structure and its operations.
Why allow and not require?
No, just to study it.
That's what I mean, they're required to study it. They're not allowed to study it, they're required to study it.
That is in our board packet. We can use a different verb.
Okay,
But you're saying, Mr. Chairman, not the internal, you're not specific to the internal audit committee, as you read it.
I felt, I would leave that to the discretion of the city manager and the board of supervisors to determine whether they wanted to change the internal auditor ordinance and expand it, or whether they wanted to go in another direction. I'm trying simply not to tie their hands. I just believe the process should be done.
So what if we went with this recommendation, proposed motion, an amendment to the Carson City Charter to require periodic studies, and then when it gets to the supervisors, they don't have to change the charter. They can just put that on their radar and maybe do it another way. So if we went with this proposed proposed motion, we could get that before them with a little wink and a nod, like, don't really do this, but bring it up for conversation.
Well, I think that Mr. Woodbury's recommendation was to not specifically amend the charter because that would require legislative action, correct?
I only meant to provide notice that that will be my recommendation to the board.
Okay.
So you don't hear that the first time with the board, because I think the structure exists in the charter. But it wouldn't be inappropriate to amend the charter to be more specific in that regard. And that is the purview of this body, is to recommend changes to the charter. And I think that's the sort of the jurisdictional hook to get the presentation before the board. And as Vice Chair Hoffman says, they can take it a different direction if they so choose. But in order to have that to remain within your purview, I do think you have to raise it as a potential amendment to the charter, which would be possible.
So the motion as is proposed would be appropriate. Any other discussion? Anybody from the public?
Considering, sorry, Denny French, Chair, thank you. Considering my lack of ability just to control my pen right now, I shouldn't say anything. But the thing is that this brings up, I don't like to take things to the board unless we've got it nailed down and have a yes or no with some budge. And I don't think they're going to have time to look into it quite as much. And I would say, not going to go for it, but could we maybe get ordinance changed so that we do internal reviews on a regular basis to figure out ways to do things more efficiently perhaps and not duplicate and all the other considerations that you have in this. So I'm a little leery of supervisor situations related to wanting to go to legislature. I don't think that they want to. So if you could put it in as an ordinance instead, that wouldn't need litigation, but how would you reprieve this off of your agenda comfortably or less suggestive that you don't like it at all or you love it, you know, but you open it up to the supervisors, and I'm a little concerned about how that would go. Now that I'm thinking about it more and more clearly and maybe a little more steadily, I'd like to step back from it going anywhere near legislative and then have it where you can do it in-house through an ordinances. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments based upon the public?
Just a quick question, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Woodbury. As to submission to the legislature, and I'm aware of the danger of submitting anything to our state legislature, but I assume there is going to be a charter package submitted to the legislature with some changes or not. Is that assumption not right?
I don't know if that's right. It'll be up to the board. And I'll just be candid about a few things. We submitted the charter amendments last time.
Yeah.
The board may very well look at the amendments that are proposed this year and say, well, I understand the language is problematic. I understand the language with the animals and poultry section is outdated. I understand that the 6 months for returns, we should just make that consistent and make it 22 months. But we're doing that already. So we're going to use our one bill draft request for something different. I don't know that if that's the case, they may very well be willing and ready to do another charter amendment. But I do also know that, you know, I'm expecting we'll get the question, how come you didn't catch this last time? And-
Understand.
Yeah, and we may get that question from the legislature too, like, come on, guys, let's get this figured out and, you know, not be revisiting your charter every legislative session. So I just say that, so I don't know what the board's gonna do or not do with it.
Okay, I'm going to throw this one, Hanneman, in left field and, or throw it out into left field. I'm not a baseball fan here. But talking about the board, the education board, I would think, you know, you were talking about the fact that you were ahead of the curve on everything, but that comes from management, not so much the board. It came from management down who saw things. So that got me to thinking, why can't we just simply make this one of the duties of the city manager as part of his or her, I'm too close, sorry, part of his or her duties, and be done with it, basically, instead of putting it in writing out here, putting it in writing in the contract. Just a suggestion.
If I may, Stephanie Hicks, Deputy City Manager, I would just kind of piggyback on what you're saying, Ronnie, and pick up on some of the discussion that was being had. The city does have a strategic plan. We do that every 5 years. We worked very hard on this last plan to establish within it performance measures that we actually report on every year. We have a dynamic dashboard online, and so every year, all of the departments who were tasked with tactics and objectives have to report to show, did we meet that? Have we done the job that we set out to do? So I do feel something like that could be very appropriate to be within our strategic plan.
That makes a whole lot more sense when it comes from internal, because your city manager is the one that is really running the city with the assistance, obviously, of the board. So we are a city manager form of government, are we not?
We are.
Okay, so I think it really has to come from the city manager, as I was saying, it's from the top down, because he or she is the one responsible for every single department, with the assistance of a deputy, for running this and for reporting it to the Board of Supervisors. So I don't know. And that, to me, is good strategic planning, as a CEO or, you know, any company would do this.
Thank you. Does anybody want to make a motion?
Based on that last comment, I move to not recommend to the Board of Supervisors an amendment to the Carson City Charter to require periodic studies of the city's organizational structure and its operations.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second?
Motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Would we have a hand vote?
Can I abstain? Or do I have to make a nay or a yay?
Mr. Woodbury?
You don't have a legal cause to abstain, so you have to pick.
All right, so I will go along with it.
So we have 4 ayes? 3? Okay, 3 opposed? $33.
So the motion does not carry.
The motion does not carry. Do I have another motion? Maybe I can help some people. We're only making a recommendation. The board they can take no action whatsoever on it and leave it sit in the drawer. I merely think it's an opportunity for this committee to put forth our concerns to the board regarding this issue. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. The board can play with it and try to work with the city manager to amend it, or they can shelve it. I just think that I want the board to know that the committee had an extensive discussion on this issue and that we'd like them to look at it.
Oh, and I think you can make those comments when we present it to the board, because we usually have, don't we do that? We have a go over where we all show up and you talk, and you should say that we had our longest meeting ever because we had this discussion about how important this is to us, but we couldn't come to a necessary recommendation because of all the outside sources and legalities that we don't know of.
Well, could we merely make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to request staff to investigate periodic studies of the city's organizational structure, its operations, efficiencies, and effectiveness?
I think you can do that, yes. Because the purpose of the direction would be to determine whether an amendment to the charter would be necessary or appropriate to achieve that purpose, or if there was an alternative method. So I do think that's within your purview.
Okay,
Let's
Vice
see.
Chair Hoffman.
All right, let's see if we can do it. I move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors to direct staff to investigate the possibility of requiring periodic studies of the city's organizational structure and its operations.
And whether an amendment to
And whether an
the Carson
amendment
City
to the
Charter
Carson
would be
City Charter
necessary.
would be necessary.
I will second that,
I
Hanneman.
have a motion and I have a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, the matters before us. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? We have 5-1. Matter carries. Whew.
Thank you,
Right.
Chairman.
Thank
So we did present to you the language that is being proposed for recommendation and have the recommendation on the previous item to take forward to the board. At this point, the committee could determine whether there are any future items that we need to discuss, or the next step in the process would be to take your recommendations forward to the Board of Supervisors in July.
Any comments from the committee?
So this is the appropriate time, Mr. Chair, to bring up other issues?
That's correct.
One of the things I talking again to the public and being involved in a couple of these efforts in the past has been the naming of buildings, events, places in Carson City after individuals. We've had several in the last couple of years. The decisions on to go forward with it, with the naming, have been somewhat arbitrary. And there really isn't any specific criteria that are used now for naming. And there's, I think, some dissatisfaction with the way it's done now. I don't have a proposal on how it ought to be done because it's kind of a touchy issue. But there are probably people in this room that have been involved in it in the last few years. And I don't know if it's a charter issue. Maybe it is not. And it's too broad for this committee to get involved in. But it is an issue in the community, and the criteria for naming just isn't there now.
Well, Member Robinson, that's a good point. I don't know of a specific section in the charter that addresses the naming of public or city buildings and parks. My experience has been it's come by and through either effort by the public that they feel that someone should be recognized, or merely an amendment offered by someone in city government, whether it be the Board of Supervisors or the city manager or anyone else that comes before the Board of Supervisors with potential concerns regarding how they want buildings and parks, things like that named. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Woodbury.
I have no idea what the process is.
It's political as the name the naming of it is the naming itself.
Mr. Chairman, Stephanie Hicks for the record. There is a procedure in place that approvals for naming conventions do have to come to the Board of Supervisors. That essentially is for parks and open space and trails and other facilities. So I'm not 100% certain that it's in code, but there is a procedure, and actually we plan to bring forward some naming conventions in June or July of this year. But it is by board approval.
Yeah, and I think in practice, it very much reminds me of lobbying with the legislature, or call people, you gain a coalition, which is not bad, it's not wrong. But I think for the supervisors themselves, to avoid being completely arbitrary, having some kind of criteria there would be helpful to everybody.
And don't forget the city streets themselves. Well, it starts with the developers, but sometimes it ends with action of the board. So, do we have time to offer this type of this consideration?
We could do a June meeting. So there is time as far as another meeting date. Again, I guess I would just question whether it's a charter item or not. Maybe something that is more for municipal code.
Well, why don't we do this, subject to Steve's comments? Why don't we ask you to look at the procedure, and if you think that we should have another meeting, then you can contact us and go ahead and schedule it. I mean, yeah, let's try that. And that'll give you time to bring something back that's accurate and we can depend upon it.
Okay, great. We can look into that. I do have some tentative dates that I would just throw out while I have everybody here to poll at one time. We had availability as far as room and staff for June 10th at 10 a.m. I'll just throw that out as the first one if that works.
Let's see here. That would be a Monday. That's fine with me. Election, yes, it is. Are you on?
No? Okay. 10 a.m. Another date that I do have is the 12th at 1.
I can do either. Let's try the 12th.
Okay. I will just put that down tentatively for now, and we will look into the procedures and then get with you and let you know.
And Ms. Hicks, maybe you can bring some history to us on that issue also.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Is there any other matter to come before the committee? Mr. Holm?
I do have something that you may want to put on the radar, if not this year, maybe 2 years down the road. But the previous clerk recorder that had this position had an issue with workload of being the clerk, the recorder, the registrar of voters, and the public administrator. And the public administrator is under this responsibility just because of our charter. All the other counties in the state of Nevada, the public administrator is a separate function. And I know the Board of Supervisors has heard this before and probably went over some dollars and cents about it, but it might be worth a revisit, just as you're talking about. Look at government function, what should or shouldn't be, what's the efficiencies. It's something that you may want to put on your radar, that's all.
It's a good point. Mr. Woodbury, maybe we could put it under your bailiwick, huh?
No, thank you.
Okay. Does the committee want to put that on our agenda on the June 12th? Ms. Hicks, can you look into that also for us?
Yes, I certainly can. I know that the board has heard the item before, so I can bring you that history.
Perfect, thank you. Any other things to come before the committee? Hearing none, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Before we, excuse me, before we adjourn, I have to tell you, Mr. Staub, you really did your homework. You were up nights for this one, weren't you? This meeting.
Thank you.
And I make a motion to adjourn.
I'm sorry, we do need to take closing public comment.
Okay, is there any member of the public want to come before the committee?
Denny French, Carson City, thank you very much, Chair. And the extra material that I was given just coming in today, and then what I found from the material that I had found, the Division of Discovery, research. I'm just thrilled with what I've just picked up today and what I will be looking into in the future. So thank you very much for all of you being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. French.
So
I believe I have a motion and a second to adjourn. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Matter carries. We're adjourned.